The sound that woke me wasn't loud. It was subtle, a shift of weight, the whisper of fabric against skin, a breath that wasn't mine. I opened my eyes in the darkness of my bedroom, and my brain, still half submerged in whatever dream I'd been having, took a few seconds to process what I was seeing. There was someone in my bed. Not beside my bed, not near my bed, in my bed, under my covers, sleeping. I sat up so fast I almost gave myself whiplash. My heart was doing something arrhythmic and panicked in my chest. The rational part of my brain, the part that pays bills and remembers to floss, was screaming at me to call 911. But the other part, the part that had apparently been in charge when I decided to freeze instead of flee, was stuck on a single, unhelpful observation. The stranger was shirtless and beautiful. I could see him in the ambient light coming through my bedroom window, the street light outside my Brooklyn apartment building providing just enough illumination to make out details. Dark hair, messy in a way that suggested sleep rather than styling. Tan skin, broad shoulders. A face that even in sleep had the kind of bone structure that made you understand why people became sculptors. He was on his side, facing away from me, one arm tucked under the pillow, breathing slow and even. Deeply, genuinely asleep. I reached very slowly for my phone on the nightstand, trying not to make any sound, trying not to think about the fact that my apartment was on the fourth floor and the fire escape window was locked and this man was between me and the bedroom door. My hand closed around my phone. I unlocked it. The screen brightness made me wince. I pulled up my recent calls. Nadia was at the top, my best friend, the person I called for everything from should I buy these shoes to I think I'm having an existential crisis. And I was about to press dial when the man in my bed moved. Not violently, not threateningly. He just rolled over onto his back, sighed, and settled deeper into sleep. And I saw his face fully for the first time. I knew him. Not well, not really, but I knew him. His name was Elias Morno. He was a paramedic. We'd met exactly 3 times, once at a community health fair where I'd been volunteering for the LGBTQ+ youth center where I worked, once at a mutual friend's birthday party, and once at a coffee shop where we'd ended up in line together and had a 5-minute conversation about how the oat milk foam never quite worked the same as regular milk foam, and wasn't that a metaphor for something? He'd been charming all 3 times, funny in a dry, understated way, easy to talk to, and yes, extremely attractive, which I'd noticed and then deliberately not thought about because I was busy being professionally friendly, and also because men who looked like Elias Morno did not typically express interest in men who looked like me, which is to say average height, average build, with glasses and the kind of face that people describe as nice, when they can't think of anything more specific to say. But that didn't explain why he was in my bed at 2 in the morning. I sat there holding my phone, trying to make sense of it. Had we planned something? No, absolutely not. I would have remembered planning something that involved Elias Morno being in my apartment, let alone in my bed. Had I drunk texted him, I looked at my phone. No messages sent, no calls made. I hadn't even been drinking. I'd worked late at the center, come home, eaten Thai food, and gone to bed at 11:30 like the deeply boring 29-year-old I was. Which left the question, how did he get in here? I looked at the bedroom door. It was closed but not locked. I never locked it because I lived alone, and who locks their bedroom door when they live alone? I looked at Elias again. He was still sleeping peacefully, apparently untroubled by the fact that he'd broken into someone's apartment and passed out in their bed. I should have been scared, I should have called someone, but instead I was just confused and weirdly concerned. Because Elias didn't look like someone who'd broken in with malicious intent. He looked exhausted. He had dark circles under his eyes. His face, even in sleep, had a tension to it that suggested he'd been stressed or in pain or both. Something was wrong. I did what any reasonable person would do in this situation, which is to say I did something completely unreasonable. I reached out and gently shook his shoulder. Elias. Nothing. Elias, hey, wake up. He stirred slightly, made a sound that might have been a word, and rolled toward me. His eyes opened halfway, unfocused, confused, and he looked directly at me. Marco, his voice was rough with sleep. Yeah, it's Marco, you're in my bed, in my apartment, at 2 in the morning, and I'm trying very hard not to freak out about it, so maybe you could explain what's happening. Elias blinked slowly, processing, then his eyes went wide. He sat up fast, looked around the room, looked down at himself, shirtless, wearing only boxer briefs, and then looked back at me with an expression of pure horror. Oh my God. Yeah. This is your apartment. Yes. I'm in your bed. Extremely yes. He put his face in his hands. I am so sorry. I can explain. I swear I can explain. It's not I didn't. He stopped, took a breath, tried again. What floor is this? Fourth. Fourth, he looked at me. I live on the fifth floor, this building. I moved in 3 weeks ago. I came home from a double shift at the hospital and I was so tired I could barely see straight and I got off on the wrong floor and I used my key and the door opened and I didn't even turn on the lights. I just walked to the bedroom and got into bed. I stared at him. Your key worked on my door. I know it sounds insane, but these old buildings, sometimes the locks, they're not all different. I didn't break in, I promise, the key just worked. I processed this. It was insane, but it was also the kind of insane that made a weird amount of sense. My building was a pre-war walk-up in Bed-Stuy with original fixtures and locks that the landlord had probably never updated because updating things cost money. And I had heard about this happening before, someone's key working on another apartment's lock, though I'd always filed it under urban legends I don't need to worry about. Okay, I said slowly. So you live upstairs, you thought this was your apartment, you were exhausted and didn't notice you were on the wrong floor. Yes, exactly. He looked at me with an expression that was equal parts mortified and pleading. I am so sorry, I can't even, I should definitely go right now. He started to get up and then stopped, apparently remembering that he was half naked. Do you have a shirt I could borrow? I don't know where mine is. I got up, went to my dresser, pulled out a t-shirt, black, plain, probably 2 sizes too small for him, and handed it to him. He pulled it on and it was, in fact, too small. It clung to his chest and shoulders in a way that I deliberately did not think about. Thank you. He stood up, looked around for his pants, found them on the floor by the bed where he'd apparently stepped out of them in his exhausted stupor, and pulled them on. I'm going to leave now and we can both pretend this never happened and I will never make eye contact with you again if we pass each other in the hallway. Or, I said, and I don't know why I said it except that it was 2 in the morning and my brain was still half asleep and making questionable decisions, you could stay for a minute and tell me why you look like you haven't slept in 3 days. Elias stopped with his hand on the bedroom doorknob. He turned to look at me. What? You have dark circles under your eyes that suggest chronic sleep deprivation. You said you just worked a double shift. You were so tired you got off on the wrong floor and didn't notice you were in someone else's apartment. I shrugged. I work with people who are burning out all the time. I know what it looks like, and you look like you need someone to ask if you're okay. The expression that crossed his face was complicated, surprise, maybe, and something that looked like relief, and something else I couldn't quite name. I'm fine, he said, which was what everyone says when they're not fine. Okay, but just so you know, you're welcome to not be fine. I make pretty good coffee, and I promise I won't call the cops on you for accidental breaking and entering. He looked at me for a long moment, then he let go of the doorknob. Coffee sounds good, he said quietly. We sat in my kitchen, which was really just a corner of my living room with a counter and a 2-burner stove and a refrigerator that made concerning noises. And I made coffee in my French press while Elias sat on one of my 2 mismatched chairs looking like a man trying to figure out how his life had arrived at this particular moment. For the record, he said, this is the weirdest thing I've ever done. Breaking into someone's apartment or accepting coffee from them afterward. Both, either, all of it. He ran a hand through his hair, which made it stick up in several different directions and somehow made him look even better. I really am sorry, this isn't something I do, I don't end up in strangers' beds. We're not strangers, we've met 3 times. 3 times barely counts as acquaintances. 4 times now, this definitely counts. I poured the coffee, added milk to mine, left his black because I didn't know how he took it. Do you want milk, sugar? Black is good, thanks. We sat in silence for a moment. Drinking coffee at 3 in the morning like this was a normal social call. The apartment was quiet except for the ambient sounds of the city, distant traffic, someone's air conditioner humming, the building itself settling in the way old buildings do. You said you work at a youth center, Elias said. Yeah, LGBTQ plus youth center in Park Slope. I'm a counselor there. We do after-school programs, support groups, life skills workshops. A lot of the kids we work with don't have safe homes, so we try to be that for them at least a few hours a week. That's good work. It is. It's also exhausting and underfunded, and I spend half my time applying for grants and the other half wondering if I'm actually helping or just putting band-aids on things that need surgery. I paused. You're a paramedic. Yeah. That's also good work, and also probably exhausting. He smiled slightly. Yeah, I love it, but it's a lot, especially lately. We've been understaffed for months. People keep leaving for jobs that pay better or burn them out less. So those of us who are left end up picking up extra shifts, working doubles, running on fumes. How long has it been since you had a day off? He thought about it. 11 days. 11 days. I know, it's not sustainable, I know that, but what am I supposed to do? Say no when they call and ask if I can cover someone's shift? People need help, that's the job. I looked at him over my coffee mug. He was still wearing my too small t-shirt. He had pillow lines on his face from sleeping on my pillow. He looked tired and stressed and like he was holding himself together through sheer force of will. You know what I tell the kids at the center when they're burning themselves out trying to take care of everyone else, I said. What? That you can't pour from an empty cup, that taking care of yourself isn't selfish, that you're allowed to have limits. I paused. I'm not very good at following that advice myself, but it's still true. Elias looked at me for a long moment. When we met at that coffee shop, he said, you were telling the barista about some problem with your debit card and the barista was being kind of rude about it and you were so patient with them. You just kept explaining calmly until they figured it out, and then you tipped them anyway. And I remember thinking, that guy is either a saint or deeply conflict-averse. Probably the second one. I don't think so, I think you're just kind, which is, he stopped, looked down at his coffee. It's nice, people aren't kind enough. There was something in the way he said it that made me think he wasn't just talking about strangers in coffee shops. That maybe he was talking about himself, about what he did and didn't allow himself to need. Can I ask you something? I said. Sure. Why did you really stay when I offered coffee? You could have just left, gone upstairs to your actual apartment and pretended this never happened, but you stayed. Why? Elias was quiet for a while, long enough that I thought maybe he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, because when you woke up and found me in your bed, you didn't panic, you didn't yell or freak out or call the police. You looked at me like you were trying to figure out what was wrong, like maybe I needed help instead of needing to be feared, and he stopped, started again. I haven't had anyone look at me like that in a while. Like I might be someone worth helping instead of someone who helps other people, and I guess I didn't want to walk away from that yet. My chest did something complicated. Something that felt like recognition and sadness and the particular kind of ache that comes from seeing yourself in someone else's struggle. You're worth helping, I said quietly, for the record. You don't know me. I know you work doubles when you're so tired you can't see straight because you don't want to let people down. I know you apologized approximately 15 times for an honest mistake. I know you're sitting in a stranger's kitchen at 3 in the morning drinking bad coffee instead of going upstairs to your own bed because someone offered you 5 minutes of not having to hold everything together alone. I shrugged. That's not nothing. Elias looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Your coffee's not bad. It's mediocre at best. It's 3 in the morning. At 3 in the morning, any coffee that's hot and contains caffeine is good coffee. We smiled at each other and something shifted in the air between us. Something subtle but undeniable, a recognition, a possibility. I should let you sleep, Elias said, but he didn't move. You should sleep too. When was the last time you got 8 hours? I genuinely don't remember. Then go upstairs and sleep. Don't pick up any extra shifts for the next 3 days. Tell them you're sick or having an existential crisis or whatever you need to tell them. Just rest. I can't just. You can, you're not the only paramedic in New York. The system will survive without you for 3 days, but you won't survive if you keep going like this. He looked at me for a long moment. You're bossy. I prefer assertively compassionate. Is that a thing? It is now. He laughed and it changed his whole face, made him look younger, less burdened, more like someone who remembered how to be happy. Okay, 3 days, I'll take 3 days. Good. He stood up, took his mug to the sink, rinsed it out, which he didn't have to do but which somehow made sense for someone who spent his professional life taking care of people. Then he turned to face me. Thank you, Marco, for the coffee and for not calling the cops and for, he gestured vaguely, all of this. You're welcome, and hey, if you ever need to accidentally break into someone's apartment again, mine's always available. I'll keep that in mind. He headed toward the door and I followed him. He opened it, stepped out into the hallway, and then turned back. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure." "When we met at that birthday party, Jenna's party, last year, you were talking to someone about a book you just read, something about queer history, and I wanted to come over and join the conversation, but I thought," he stopped, shook his head. "Never mind, it's not important." "What did you think?" "I thought you looked like someone I'd want to know better, but I didn't know how to start that conversation without it being weird, so I just didn't." My heart was doing something irregular again, but this time it wasn't panic. "For what it's worth," I said, "breaking into my apartment at 2 in the morning is definitely weirder than just saying hi at a party." He grinned. "Yeah, probably, but at least this way we'll have a good story." That's one way to look at it. We stood there for a moment in the doorway, neither of us quite ready to end the conversation, and then Elias said, "Good night, Marco," or "good morning," whichever. "Good night, Elias." I watched him walk down the hallway to the stairwell, watched him disappear up the stairs to the 5th floor, and then I closed my door and leaned against it, and thought about the fact that sometimes the strangest things that happen to you turn out to be the beginning of something you didn't know you needed. I went back to bed, but I didn't fall asleep for a long time. I just lay there thinking about tired brown eyes and pillow lines on tan skin and the way someone's whole face can change when they let themselves laugh. And I thought about the fact that I'd given him my phone number. Actually, I hadn't. We'd forgotten to exchange numbers. We'd had this entire strange, intimate conversation, and then we just said goodnight without any way to continue it. I picked up my phone and opened the building's tenant message board, one of those apps that landlords set up so tenants can complain about noise or arrange package deliveries or whatever, and I scrolled until I found him. Elias Morno, 5B. I typed a message. "This is Marco from 4B. You forgot your shirt. Also, I make better coffee than you've been led to believe. If you want a rematch, let me know." I hit send before I could overthink it, and then I put my phone face down on the nightstand and closed my eyes and told myself to sleep. My phone buzzed 30 seconds later. "I'll take that rematch tomorrow or today, technically, after we both sleep." "Today works, noon." "Noon, I'll bring something that goes with mediocre coffee." "It's not mediocre." "Prove it." I fell asleep smiling, which was not how I'd expected this night to end. Elias showed up at exactly 12:03 with a paper bag from the Good Bakery on Nostrand Avenue and an expression that suggested he'd spent the morning questioning all his life choices. "I brought croissants," he said when I opened the door. "And also I'm having second thoughts about this entire thing because I've now convinced myself that you were just being polite last night and don't actually want me showing up at your door." "I texted you." "People text people to be polite. At 3 in the morning. Maybe you're really committed to politeness." I took the bag from him and stepped back to let him in. "I'm not that committed. Come in, the coffee is ready and it's going to blow your mind." "That's a strong claim." "I'm a confident man." He came inside and I closed the door behind him, and we stood there for a second in that particular kind of awkward that happens when you've had an unexpectedly intimate conversation with someone at 3 in the morning, and now you're trying to figure out how to interact with them in daylight. "So," Elias said. So I agreed. "This is weird, right? It's not just me." "It's definitely weird, but I think it's good weird. Like finding $20 in your coat pocket weird, not like discovering a spider in your shoe weird." "That's very specific." "I found a spider in my shoe last week. It was traumatic." He laughed, and just like that the awkwardness dissipated. We moved into the kitchen area and I poured coffee and he set out the croissants on actual plates because apparently we were doing this properly, and we sat across from each other at my small table and it felt both completely natural and completely surreal. "Okay," Elias said after his first sip. "I take it back, this is actually good coffee." "I told you." "How did you make it different from last night?" "I didn't. Last night you were running on fumes and would have thought instant coffee was good. Today you're rested enough to actually taste things." "Did you just trick me into admitting I needed sleep?" "Yes, how does it feel to be manipulated for your own good?" "Honestly, pretty nice." He took another sip, looking at me over the rim of the mug. "You're different than I thought you'd be." "How did you think I'd be?" I don't know, quieter maybe, more reserved. The few times we talked before you seemed kind of not shy exactly but careful, like you were being very deliberate about what you said and how you said it. I am careful. I work with teenagers who are going through some of the hardest times of their lives. I can't afford to be careless with my words. One wrong thing and I could lose their trust. I paused. But I'm less careful when it's 3 in the morning and someone accidentally breaks into my apartment and turns out to need a friend. Is that what we are, friends? It was a genuine question asked without agenda, and I appreciated that. I don't know yet. I think we could be, or we could be something else. I'm not in a hurry to define it. Something else. I looked at him directly. Elias, you're a very attractive man who showed up in my bed at 2 in the morning. I'm not going to pretend I didn't notice, but I'm also not going to make this weird by putting pressure on something that doesn't have a shape yet. So yeah, we could be friends or we could be something else. Let's just see what happens. The look he gave me was complicated, surprise, maybe, and something that might have been relief, and something else that looked almost like hope. You're very direct. Only when it matters. The rest of the time I'm conflict averse and overthink everything. I don't believe that. It's true, I spent 20 minutes this morning deciding whether to text you or wait for you to text me. I wrote and deleted 4 different messages. I almost talked myself out of this entire thing. What made you not talk yourself out of it? I remembered the way you looked when you said you hadn't had anyone look at you like you were worth helping in a while, and I thought, if I don't reach out, I'm just confirming that instinct, that you're someone who helps people but doesn't get help back, and that felt wrong. Elias was quiet for a moment. He broke off a piece of croissant, not eating it, just holding it. Can I tell you something? Always. I came out when I was 22, late by a lot of people's standards. I'd known since I was a teenager, but I grew up in a Catholic family in a small town, and it wasn't something I could do until I left. Until I moved to New York and had some distance and some space to figure out who I was without everyone watching. I nodded, staying quiet, letting him go at his own pace. And when I did come out, my family they weren't terrible. They didn't disown me or anything dramatic. They were just disappointed, quietly disappointed, like I'd failed some test I didn't know I was taking, and they never quite got past it. We still talk, but there's always this distance now, this sense that I'm not quite what they wanted me to be. I'm sorry, that's hard. It is hard, but here's the thing, I think I internalized that disappointment. I think I spent so much energy trying to prove that I was still worth something, still valuable, still deserving of love, that I forgot I didn't have to earn those things, that they're not conditional, that I'm allowed to just be, without performing productivity or usefulness or whatever. He looked up at me. Last night when you asked me why I stayed, I said it was because you looked at me like I was worth helping, but it's more than that. You looked at me like I was worth something even when I wasn't doing anything useful, even when I was just broken into your apartment and was sitting there being a mess, and I haven't felt that in a long time. My chest ached with recognition. I know what that's like, not the same circumstances but the same feeling. I came out when I was 19 and my parents they were fine with it actually. Super supportive, all the right things, but I think I still absorbed this message that I had to be exceptional to be acceptable, that being gay was fine as long as I was also smart and accomplished and didn't make anyone uncomfortable. So I spent my 20s trying to be perfect and burning myself out in the process. What changed? I had a breakdown at 26, full panic attack in the middle of a staff meeting, ended up in therapy twice a week for a year, learned that perfectionism is just fear with better PR. I shrugged. I'm still working on it, but I'm better at recognizing when I'm doing it now, and I'm better at giving myself permission to be a person instead of a performance. Elias smiled slightly, so we're both works in progress. Seems like it. We ate croissants and drank coffee and talked about easier things, music we liked, books we'd read, the strange ecosystem of New York apartment buildings. And it was easy, comfortable, the kind of conversation where you lose track of time because you're actually interested in what the other person is saying. At some point I realized it was almost 2 o'clock and we'd been sitting there for 2 hours. I should probably let you go, I said. I'm sure you have things to do. I don't actually, I took 3 days off, remember your idea, so I'm completely free. Oh well, in that case, do you want to go for a walk? There's a park nearby, it's a nice day. I'd like that. We walked to Prospect Park, which was crowded with people doing all the things people do in Brooklyn parks on sunny afternoons, jogging, walking dogs, having picnics, playing frisbee. We found a quieter section near the lake and walked along the path and kept talking. At some point our hands brushed and neither of us moved away. At some point Elias said, "Can I ask you something personal? You've already told me about your family and your coming out story. I think we're past the point of avoiding personal questions. Fair, are you seeing anyone?" "No, I dated someone for about 6 months last year but it didn't work out. We wanted different things. He wanted something casual and I wanted not casual, so we ended it." I paused. "Are you seeing anyone?" "No, I was in a relationship until about 8 months ago, 2 years together. He was a lawyer, very successful, very driven, very sure about what he wanted, which turned out to not include someone who worked irregular hours and came home exhausted and sometimes woke up from nightmares about calls that went wrong." "I'm sorry." "Don't be, he was right to leave. I wasn't present. I was working too much and processing too little and I wasn't a good partner. I think I knew it was ending before he did." "That doesn't make it hurt less." "No, but it makes it make sense." We walked in silence for a while and then Elias said, "Can I tell you what I'm thinking right now?" "Yes." "I'm thinking that I accidentally broke into your apartment last night and it turned out to be the best mistake I've made in years. And I'm thinking that I really want to kiss you but I don't want to rush anything because this feels important and I don't want to mess it up. My heart was doing that irregular thing again. Can I tell you what I'm thinking?" "Yes." "I'm thinking that you should kiss me, and I'm thinking that we can take everything else slowly but we don't have to take this slowly, because sometimes you just know." "Know what?" "That something is worth the risk." He stopped walking. We were under a tree slightly off the main path and the afternoon light was coming through the leaves in scattered gold and the city sounds were distant enough to feel like a different world. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I'm sure." He kissed me and it was exactly what a first kiss should be, careful and sure at the same time, tentative and certain, a question and an answer. His hand came up to cup the side of my face and I leaned into it and thought about how strange and perfect it was that this had started with him accidentally ending up in my bed and was now this here real. When we broke apart he was smiling, "So that just happened." "Yeah. I have no regrets." "Good, neither do I." We walked back to the apartment building holding hands and when we got to my door Elias said, "Can I see you tomorrow? You're literally one floor away, you can see me whenever you want. I want to do this properly, I want to take you on an actual date, dinner, something nice, the whole thing." "Okay, tomorrow dinner, something nice." "It's a date." He kissed me again, quick and sweet, and then he headed up the stairs to the 5th floor and I went inside and closed my door and stood there for a moment thinking about how sometimes the universe has a strange sense of humor and an even stranger sense of timing. My phone buzzed. "Elias, I forgot to ask what kind of food you like. Please don't say something difficult like 'I'm allergic to everything' or 'I only eat foods that start with the letter Q.' Marco, I like everything except olives. Olives are a crime against taste buds." "Elias, finally something we disagree on. Olives are perfect." "Marco, this relationship is doomed." "Elias, will work through it. See you tomorrow." I went to bed that night thinking about the way his hand had felt in mine and the way he kissed like he meant it, and the fact that sometimes the best things in life start with 2 a.m. and a stranger in your bed who turns out not to be a stranger at all. Elias took me to a small Italian restaurant in Carroll Gardens that had checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles and the kind of atmosphere that made you want to lean across the table and talk about real things. We did. We talked about our work, his stories from the ambulance, my stories from the youth center. We talked about growing up in different kinds of families that had similar expectations. We talked about New York and why we stayed even though it was expensive and exhausting and sometimes actively hostile to the idea of rest. "I stay because I can be myself here," Elias said. "Not everywhere, not all the time, but enough. Enough that I feel like I'm living my life instead of performing someone else's version of it. That's exactly why I stay too. I grew up in Queens, my parents still live there, and I could probably afford a bigger place if I moved back. But there's something about Brooklyn, about this particular corner of it, that feels like home in a way nowhere else ever has." "What makes it feel like home?" I thought about it. The fact that I can walk down the street holding hands with a guy and nobody cares. The fact that the bodega owner knows my name and asks about my day. The fact that I can hear 6 different languages on my block and see 10 different kinds of families and all of them are just normal, nobody's performing anything, we're all just living. Elias reached across the table and took my hand. I'm really glad you're a light sleeper. What? If you'd slept through me getting into your bed, none of this would have happened. We'd still be people who'd met 3 times and never quite figured out how to have a real conversation. 4 times. Right, 4, the coffee shop counts. The coffee shop definitely counts. We ordered dessert, tiramisu, which we shared, and Elias told me about growing up in a small town in Pennsylvania where everyone knew everyone and privacy was a theoretical concept. About being the kid who was good at sports and academics and always did the right thing, and how exhausting it was to be that kid when you were also hiding a fundamental part of yourself. I used to think, he said, that if I was just good enough at everything else it wouldn't matter that I was gay, like I could earn my right to exist by being exceptional. And then I moved here and met people who were just themselves unapologetically without earning it, and I realized I'd been operating under the wrong model my entire life. What's the right model? There isn't one, that's the point, you just are, you exist. You're allowed to take up space and make mistakes and be imperfect, you don't have to justify your existence. That's very wise. I'm still learning it, but I'm getting better. After dinner we walked through the neighborhood, brown stone-lined streets with trees just starting to bud, spring coming in slow and inevitable. We ended up on the promenade overlooking the East River with the Manhattan skyline lit up across the water, and Elias put his arm around me and I leaned into him and we stood there watching the city breathe. Can I tell you something that might be too much too soon? Elias said. Yes. I really like you, like a lot. And I know we've technically only known each other for a few days in any real way, but it doesn't feel like a few days. It feels like I've been waiting to meet you and I just didn't know it. I turned to face him. That's not too much, that's exactly the right amount, and I feel the same way. Yes. Yeah. He kissed me there on the promenade with the Manhattan skyline behind us and the sound of the water below us, and I thought about how sometimes love doesn't announce itself gradually. Sometimes it just shows up at 2 in the morning and says, "Here I am," and you either have the courage to say yes or you don't. I was saying yes. We fell into a rhythm. Elias worked his shifts, regular ones now, not the constant doubles, and I worked at the center. We had dinner together most nights, sometimes at his place, sometimes at mine. We watched movies and argued about which streaming service had the best interface and learned each other's rhythms. I learned that Elias was a morning person who woke up at 5:30 even on his days off, and went for a run before the city fully woke up. I learned that he was meticulous about keeping his space organized because chaos at work meant he needed order at home. I learned that he had nightmares sometimes, not often, but enough about calls that had gone wrong or patients he couldn't save, and that he'd wake up disoriented and need a few minutes to remember where he was. He learned that I was a night person who did my best thinking after 10 p.m. He learned that I stress cooked when I was worried about work, which meant his freezer was now full of containers of soup and casseroles. He learned that I had a complicated relationship with my parents, loved them, was grateful for their support, but also felt sometimes like I was disappointing them by not being more ambitious, more successful, more everything. You run a youth center that helps queer kids who have nowhere else to go, Elias said when I told him this. That's the opposite of not being ambitious. I know, intellectually I know, but there's this voice in my head that sounds like my mother saying, "That's nice, dear, but when are you going to do something important?" Even though she's never actually said that, even though she's proud of me, the voice is still there. Maybe the voice isn't really your mother's, maybe it's yours. That's what my therapist says. Your therapist is right. We had our first fight 3 weeks in. It was about something stupid. I'd made plans with Nadia for a Friday night and forgotten to tell Elias, and he'd assumed we'd spend the evening together, and when I said I couldn't he got quiet in that particular way that meant he was hurt but trying not to show it. You're upset, I said. I'm not upset. You're doing the thing where you say you're not upset but your voice gets very controlled and you won't look at me. That's upset. I'm not. He stopped, took a breath. Okay, I'm a little upset, but I know I don't have a right to be. We haven't talked about expectations or how much time we're supposed to spend together or anything like that. I just assumed. What did you assume? That Friday nights were our time. That's stupid. I know that's stupid. It's not stupid. I should have told you about the plans. I should have checked in with you first. I sat down next to him on his couch. Can we make a rule that we tell each other when we're upset instead of pretending we're not, because I'd rather fight honestly than peacefully lie to each other. He looked at me. You want to fight? I want to have the kind of relationship where we can disagree without it meaning something's wrong. Where we can say, hey, this hurt me, and the other person says, I hear you, let's figure it out instead of getting defensive. That sounds exhausting. It's less exhausting than wondering what the other person is actually feeling. He smiled slightly. Okay, new rule, honesty over peace. Honesty over peace. We worked it out. I rescheduled with Nadia. She understood. She'd met Elias and liked him and had opinions about our relationship that she shared freely and often. And Elias and I spent Friday night cooking dinner together and talking about what we actually wanted from this thing we were building. I want something real, Elias said. Not casual, not ambiguous. I want to know that when I'm having a terrible shift I can text you and you'll respond. I want to know that when you're stressed about work I'm the person you talk to. I don't know what to call it, but I want us to be each other's people. I want that too, but I also want to make sure we're not moving too fast because we're both so relieved to find someone who gets it that we're not checking whether we actually work. Do you think we work? I think we're working, which is different, which is better actually, because it means we're both choosing this instead of just falling into it. Very philosophical. I have a master's degree in counseling. I'm professionally philosophical. He kissed me. I'm really glad you're professionally philosophical, and I'm really glad you're my person. Even when I forget to tell you about plans with Nadia. Especially then because you didn't get defensive, you just figured it out with me. That's what partners do. Is that what we are, partners? I looked at him. 3 weeks. It had been 3 weeks since he'd accidentally broken into my apartment. 3 weeks since I'd offered him coffee at 3 in the morning. 3 weeks since I'd kissed him in Prospect Park and decided this was worth the risk. Yeah, I said, I think that's what we are. Nadia met me for brunch on a Sunday morning at our usual spot in Fort Greene and got directly to the point the way she always did. So, she said, are you going to move in together or are you going to keep pretending you don't already live together? I looked up from my omelet. We don't live together. Marco, you sleep at his place 5 nights a week, you have a toothbrush there, you have clothes there, your mail still goes to your apartment but you're never actually there. That's living together with extra steps. It's only been 6 months. It's been 6 months of the most stable, healthy, functional relationship I've ever seen you in. Why are you waiting? I'm not waiting, I'm just being careful. You're being scared. I set down my fork. Okay, yes, I'm being scared, because what if we move in together and it ruins everything? What if we're good at dating but bad at living together? What if he realizes I'm annoying to share space with, or I realize he's too neat, or we can't figure out how to share a bathroom? Or, Nadia said, what if none of that happens and you're just happy? Why is that not the assumption? Because I've never been good at assuming I get to be happy. She reached across the table and took my hand. I know you've spent your whole life bracing for disappointment, but Marco, listen to me. This guy accidentally broke into your apartment and fell asleep in your bed, and instead of calling the cops you made him coffee. And then you fell in love with him. If that's not the universe telling you to take a chance, I don't know what is. I called Elias on my walk home from brunch. Hey, he said, how was Nadia? Insightful and meddling as always. What did she meddle about this time? Us, specifically the fact that I'm at your place most of the time but still paying rent on an apartment I barely use. There was a pause. She's not wrong. I know. Do you want to talk about it? Can you come over to my place? I know it's weird because we're never there, but I'll be there in 10 minutes. He showed up in 8 minutes wearing sweatpants and a hoodie and looking slightly worried. We sat on my couch, the one I'd barely sat on in months, and I said, I'm scared. Of what? Of this being too good, of waiting for the other shoe to drop, of moving in with you and having it be the thing that breaks us because we realize we can't actually share space, or we drive each other crazy, or we just stop working. Elias took my hand. Can I tell you something? Always. I'm scared too. I'm terrified actually. Because I've never lived with anyone I was in love with before. I lived with my ex, but I don't think I was actually in love with him. I think I was just trying to convince myself I was, and I don't know if I'm good at it. I don't know if I'm easy to live with. I know I'm neat to the point of being annoying, and I wake up early and I have nightmares sometimes, and I come home from work emotionally drained. And maybe that's all fine when we're dating, but maybe it's too much when we're sharing a bathroom. So we're both scared. Yeah. But we both want to try anyway. Yeah. I leaned my head against his shoulder. Okay, let's do it. Let's move in together. Let's be terrified together. Where? Your place. It's bigger and it doesn't have weird stains on the ceiling. You never told me about the ceiling stains. They're shaped like animals. It's a whole thing. He laughed, and I felt it through his chest where my head was resting, and I thought about how 6 months ago I'd woken up to find a stranger in my bed, and now that stranger was the person I wanted to wake up next to every morning for as long as he'd let me. We moved in together the following month. It was a process, sorting through whose furniture to keep, whose dishes to use, how to reorganize Elia's meticulous closet system to accommodate my chaos. We had moments of frustration and moments of laughter, and one memorable afternoon where we almost broke up over the correct way to load a dishwasher. There's a system, Elia said. It's a dishwasher, not a puzzle. Just put the dirty dishes in and it cleans them. If you put them in wrong, they don't get clean. I refuse to believe there's a wrong way to load a dishwasher. Marco, look at me. There is a wrong way to load a dishwasher and you're doing it. We figured it out, not just the dishwasher, everything. We figured out that I needed an hour alone after work to decompress, and he needed 30 minutes of talking through his day. We figured out that he'd cook if I did the dishes, and we'd both pretend that was an equal division of labor even though we both knew his cooking took twice as long. We figured out that his nightmares were less frequent when I was there to wake him up gently and remind him where he was. And slowly, over weeks and then months, my apartment in 4B became just storage space for things we didn't need, and then eventually I gave it up entirely and we were just living together. In 5B, with the kitchen that got good morning light and the bedroom that was big enough for both of us and all our accumulated damage and hope. We had people over for dinner on the anniversary of the night Elias had accidentally broken into my apartment. It was Nadia's idea. You have to celebrate the weirdest meet cute in history, and we'd invited her and her girlfriend and a few of Elias' coworkers from the hospital and some of my coworkers from the center. We made too much food. Elias cooked and I helped, and we barely fought about the dishwasher at all. Everyone brought wine and we told the story of how we met approximately 6 times because people kept demanding details. Wait. One of Elias' coworkers said, you just got into bed in someone else's apartment. I was very tired, Elias said. He was extremely tired, I confirmed, and very apologetic. And you didn't call the cops. He looked harmless. Also, he's very attractive. I'm not proud of my risk assessment skills that night. Everyone laughed. We ate and drank, and the apartment filled with the kind of noise that comes from people who genuinely like each other. And at some point late in the evening, I found myself standing in the kitchen doing dishes, properly, according to Elias' system, because I'd learned, and Nadia came to lean against the counter next to me. You look happy, she said. I am happy. Good, you deserve it. So does he. He's lucky he broke into the right apartment. I smiled. We both are. After everyone left, Elias and I cleaned up together and then collapsed on the couch, exhausted in the way that comes from hosting but satisfied because it had gone well. That was good, Elias said. It was. I like our people. Me too. We sat there in comfortable silence for a while and then Elias said, can I tell you something? Always. I'm really glad I was too tired to notice I was on the wrong floor that night, because if I'd gone to my own apartment we might never have had that conversation at 3 in the morning. We might have just kept being people who'd met a few times and never quite figured out how to actually connect. And he paused. I don't want to think about what my life would look like right now if that had happened. I turned to face him. You would have figured it out eventually. We would have run into each other in the building or at another party or somewhere. The universe wanted us to meet. You don't believe in the universe wanting things. I didn't used to, but you accidentally breaking into my apartment and it turning into this, that's made me reconsider my position on cosmic intervention. He kissed me slow and thorough, and when we broke apart he said, I love you. I know I've said it before but I want to say it again. I love you, Marco Torres. Thank you for not calling the cops on me. I love you too, and you're welcome, best decision I ever made. We went to bed in our shared bedroom in the apartment that used to be just his and was now ours. And I thought about how a year ago I'd been sleeping alone in 4B with ceiling stains shaped like animals and a life that was fine but not quite full. And now I was here with him, building something real out of an accidental breaking and entering in 3 a.m. coffee, and the courage to say yes to something that started strange and became exactly right. Sometimes the best things in life start at 2 in the morning with a stranger in your bed. And sometimes that stranger turns out to be the person you've been waiting for without knowing you were waiting. And sometimes, if you're very, very lucky, you get to keep them. I came home from work on a Tuesday evening to find Elias sitting on our couch with a small velvet box in his hands and an expression that was equal parts nervous and determined. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I said slowly, "what's happening right now?" "I'm about to do something that might be too much too soon even though it's been 2 years, which is probably long enough, but I'm still nervous, so I'm going to talk too much first as a delay tactic." I set down my bag and walked over to sit next to him. "Okay, talk. 2 years ago I accidentally broke into your apartment because I was too exhausted to notice I was on the wrong floor. And instead of doing the reasonable thing and kicking me out or calling the cops, you made me coffee. And you asked me if I was okay. And you looked at me like I was worth caring about even though I was a stranger who'd literally just committed a crime. It wasn't really a crime, your key worked." "Marco, let me finish." "Sorry, continue." "And then we had this perfect weird night of talking at 3 in the morning and I went upstairs and I couldn't stop thinking about you. And then we had coffee again and I still couldn't stop thinking about you. And then we had a first date and it was perfect and I really, really couldn't stop thinking about you. And I haven't stopped thinking about you for a single day in the last 2 years." He opened the box. There were 2 rings inside, simple, silver, beautiful. "I know we can't legally get married yet," he said. "I know the laws are what they are and we're still fighting for that. But I don't want to wait for laws to catch up to what I already know, which is that I want to spend my life with you. I want to have a ceremony with our people and make promises to each other and wear rings that tell the world we're committed. And I know it won't be legally binding, but it'll be real to us, and that's what matters." My eyes were burning. My chest was doing that irregular thing it had done the first night, but this time it was all joy, no panic. "Elias Morno," I said, "are you proposing to me?" "I'm proposing to you. Will you marry me, in whatever way we can, for however long you'll have me?" "Yes, absolutely yes, 100% yes." He slid a ring onto my finger, perfect fit, which meant he'd been planning this, which meant he'd been carrying this question around waiting for the right moment. And I slid the other ring onto his finger, and we sat there on our couch in our apartment in Brooklyn holding hands and wearing rings and crying like idiots. "I love you," I said. "I love you so much it's actually slightly embarrassing how much I love you." "I love you too, and I'm glad you found me embarrassing levels of lovable." We got married 3 months later in Prospect Park in the same spot where we'd had our first kiss. Nadia was my best woman. One of Elias' coworkers was his best man. We had 50 people there, friends and chosen family and some actual family, my parents and his younger sister who'd stayed close even when the rest of his family had pulled away. We wrote our own vows. Mine were about finding home in a person instead of a place. His were about learning to believe he deserved to be loved without earning it. We both cried, Nadia cried, half the guests cried, it was perfect. At the reception, a restaurant in Carroll Gardens, the same one where we'd had our first date, we told the story of how we met for what felt like the 100th time, and people laughed and shook their heads and said some version of "that's the craziest thing I've ever heard," and we agreed but also pointed out that it had worked, so maybe crazy was relative. Late in the evening, when most people had gone home and it was just us and our closest friends finishing the wine, Elias pulled me onto the tiny dance floor and we swayed together to music playing from someone's phone. "Hey," he said. "Hey. Thank you for not calling the cops on me. Thank you for accidentally breaking into my apartment. Best mistake I ever made. Best decision I ever made." We danced in the restaurant that had witnessed our beginning, surrounded by people who loved us, wearing rings that meant something even if the government didn't recognize them yet. And I thought about how 2 years ago I'd been sleeping alone with ceiling stains shaped like animals and a life that was fine but not full. And now I was here, married, to a man who'd wandered into my life by accident and stayed on purpose. Sometimes the best things that happen to you start at 2 in the morning. Sometimes they start with a stranger in your bed who turns out not to be a stranger at all. And sometimes, if you're very, very lucky, they start with a mistake that becomes the best thing that ever happened to you.